science and politics don't mix. It is very difficult when you have a political environment that's very, you're either this or this. The vast majority of us are in the middle.
You already have this implicit bias from a scientist who wants to prove their hypothesis true. And now you have a politician who wants the bill and the funding and the thing, who's like, I need that hypothesis to be true, go
Right.
make it happen. Who's affected? The person that's being studied that we're supposedly trying to help.
Exactly. Creating stickers for driver's licenses for drivers with autism to have some type of label that should they get pulled over and they scan the license, it immediately brings in this person has autism. Here are their specific triggers. That's a need.
I think the counter argument to that is, if you do that in this case, then there's the next and the next and the next and the next and the next, and now you have this like infinite level of need that pops up. Who's ever going to be able to understand infinity? No police officer is going to know how to navigate 10,000 different conditions that might all come up on the screen. I'm sure someone would also argue that it's like, well, people are gonna just start making stuff up so that they can have an easier time.
Well, we'll be fine. And as a kid, I trust my parents. So I'm like, well, yeah, I want my brother to be healed.
So we've got awareness, or let's say at least the awareness train is moving. It's flowing. It's a bullet train now. What do we do with it? What's up, friends? Hey. We're kicking off a new series here where we have much more long-form discussions about autism, about ASD, about special needs or neurodivergent children, and what the world looks like in those terms. And so I had the pleasure of meeting someone very special at a recent event we were both at. I was kind of attending as an auditor to just give feedback to the event coordinators and talk about how we can make it better next year. And the person at the event was none other than Miss Annette, also Miss Texas, for those who keep up with social media, and she was the keynote speaker for the event. And I found out at this event that she is actually doing a lot of this type of work because her charter as Miss Texas is related to autism because of some personal stories. So Annette, you want to kick us off and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get into this?
Yeah, so really excited to be here. Learned a little bit more about Unity Behavioral at the Empower Summit and just was like, wow, this is super cool. And then realized I had to go and be part of the event. So we couldn't get to talk much.
Exactly.
But yes, my name is Annette Addo-Yobo. I am the reigning Miss Texas. Have 47 days left until I retire from pageantry. So it's been an incredible run. Also first runner-up to Miss America as well, which is a huge accomplishment, especially for someone who didn't grow up in pageants. Really cool.
You didn't grow up in pageants?
No, I didn't grow up doing pageants.
When did you start?
2 years ago.
You had told me that you only got one bite at the apple, and you were like, this is it, but 2 years?
Yeah.
So you're just like, I'm going to go ace this industry, and then I'm going to go do something else after? Is that the MO?
Well, it kind of wasn't intentional. I genuinely had competed in that first local pageant, which was Miss Dallas, just thinking oh, it'd be something fun to say that I did.
Sure.
I competed in a pageant, call it a day. And then I won, and I was like, oh, wait, there's more. Oh no. I have to do this again. So I never thought that I would win Miss Texas. I just always thought I'd be competing in it because I just loved not only earning the scholarships, but making friends, being able to make an impact in my community, all of that really incredible stuff that comes with the Miss America organization. But winning Miss Texas on my second attempt, couldn't have predicted that. That didn't think it was going to happen. But I'm glad it did because going viral after winning Miss Texas was really cool, but bringing a lot of visibility to autism awareness, which is my community service initiative as Miss Texas, that was really the big thing that I think came out of my year. My spoken word talent is the talent that I do at Miss Texas, and I did it at Miss America. It went viral at both levels of competition, and just seeing the conversation about people talking about autism, sharing that, they're a mother or a sibling or a friend of somebody that's on the spectrum, and finally seeing somebody talk about it on a public and national stage, that was really my goal, was just to make autism something people can talk about. My whole life as a child, it just felt like a very taboo subject, like, oh, you don't talk about your friend or your brother with autism. And I was like, no, my brother has autism. He is a person. He is a being with dreams, passions, and interests, and he should be talked about. Like, he's a regular human being who just looks at and interacts with the world a little bit differently.
What, break this structure down for us, because I don't think the layman knows, and anybody watching this, I'm the layman here, so I don't think we know the kind of uh, high level. We all watched Miss Congeniality,
I
but we
still
don't
never seen
know
it.
what the community service initiative structure looks like, right?
Yeah.
So what is this? You have a responsibility as a result of receiving the crown that carries forward for a year, but you define that responsibility before you even start competing. That's what I've learned.
Right.
Okay.
So, as a competitor, before you even do a local pageant, you have to have a community service initiative. So, a lot of girls will do something to the effect of heart health awareness. I know a lot of them do literacy, that's a very popular one, anti bullying, maybe no drug use, no alcohol use. So, when I first started competing, my platform was actually mental health awareness and juvenile justice because I used to work in a prison. So that was my most uh, relevant thing in my life. So I
Yeah.
made that my community service
So it was
initiative.
like broadly this area of psychology and mental health.
Right.
Yeah.
But then I still did the Autism Speaks slam poetry as my talent. So after I competed at Miss Texas my first year, there were so many parents that came up to me and were like, "Thank you so much for doing that
Mm,
spoken word. Like, I related to it. I finally felt like someone was talking about it." And then that's when I realized, like, oh, maybe I can make this my platform.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then my second year, I completely changed my community service initiative, and now it's the Spark Project, which is the name I gave to autism awareness for my service initiative. Spark is an acronym for support, policy, advocacy, resource equity, and knowledge through education.
Okay.
So those are the five pillars that I work with when it comes to autism awareness.
I see.
Um, and so that was the platform that I worked with. And so with a platform, you do a lot of different things. You know, for me, it was meeting with legislators to advance legislation in Texas or in our local communities that improve the lives of autistic adults, children, and their families. It was going into elementary schools and teaching kids about disability inclusion and how you can be an inclusive peer in your classroom. It also meant going to law enforcement agencies and doing training for law enforcement officers because they don't get training
Right.
when it comes to kids that wander or kids that have aggressive behaviors in the home, and teaching them what it looks like to actually de escalate those situations. And it also meant partnering with organizations like Autism Speaks, Best Buddies, Organization for Autism Research, and fundraising for them to be able to continue the efforts and initiatives that they do. So I started doing that my second year, and then was really blessed to be able to win the title of Miss Texas and now take that to the national stage. And now I've been able to speak at the federal level, at the state level, and the local level for legislation, partnering nationally with Autism Speaks and being a national ambassador, which is awesome, so
Yep.
cool. And then, of course, getting to fundraise and get to travel to all different kinds of places. I got to speak at a keynote in Pennsylvania, perform my talent in San Francisco, do legislative work in Florida and Colorado. So it's been a whirlwind of a journey, but really meaningful work that I've been able to do with this community service initiative.
So eh, first of all, blessed is what humble people who work their butts off say when they win something really major, and so I'm not taking it. You worked your butt off, ma'am. But the reality of all of this travel, all of these events, at its core, to your point, is awareness, right? We're now entering this. Well, actually, I want to get your perspective on something before I ask you that, because we know the CDC's updated report: 1 in 31 kids, right? That we can quantify what that looks like. So I don't know if you've ever done this math, but total kids in the U.S. I'm actually looking it up right now. Something like 70 million, 74 million, right? And
Okay.
so The United States spends 19,500 per child per year on education. And so at 74 million, you're talking about a huge, huge, huge market. And I say that because we as a nation, we love our capitalism, which, I'm here for it. At the end of the day, I'm an economist at heart, and I come from a world of business. But it's not like this market doesn't exist, right? It's not like the money doesn't exist for this community, for this group of kids. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar investment for us as a country. And I think we both agree on this topic, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're basically just pissing away that money.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have this one avenue around awareness, but let's say the awareness is there. I think through the work you're doing, I think the last really 2 to 4 years, I've seen huge spikes in the level of awareness, right?
Right.
We have our friend on Survivor.
Yes.
You and I aren't going to talk about it in this one because we want to keep this a pretty positive conversation. But at the end of the day, we recently had a huge spike in awareness as a result of some pretty public reports, both from the CDC and Department of Health and Human Services. There are a lot more representatives of the community. And I think part of what happens there is awareness comes when you have representation from people who aren't technically a part of that community, right? Like you, for example. You're not affected with autism, but you're very close to it, and you've chosen to use your platform to spread the awareness. And so we're having a lot more of that type of work where somebody who has access information, right, or some type of resource is now dedicating their attention to autism. 5 years ago, I didn't even know what autism was. I shifted my entire career from tech to work on this. That kind of trend, I think, is much more exponential now than it would have been even 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
So we're on the same page there?
Yeah.
So we've got awareness, or let's say at least the awareness train is moving, right? It's flowing. It's a bullet train now. What do we do with it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, and that's really the core of what I've been doing is now that we have the awareness, there's things that need to be done. So again, when I went to do one of the law enforcement trainings that I did, I was actually surprised that none of the officers in that training had ever heard of autism, which was a little scary, considering that the sheriff invited me because there were a lot of incidences in their neighborhood of kids poorly handled by law enforcement officers who had these children had autism. And so none of them could define it for me. None of them could tell me what it was. But now that I gave them this information, I'm like, here's what you can do to interact with someone that has autism if you're pulling them over in a traffic stop, or if a parent calls and says they're having a crisis. This is what you can now do with this information. With our students, I'm telling them that, hey, now you know that someone in your classroom may have autism. Here's what you can do to include them at recess or help them learn something in class that they may struggle with. Or, hey, now you understand why this kid may not talk, but you can still include them in your games. For teachers, it's helping them understand how they can adjust their lesson plans if they have someone in their classroom in a gen ed space that is on the spectrum and needs that extra support. But really for community members, it's educating them on the gaps that are in the community. And now when we go to the polls or when we have a legislative session like what we have right now in Texas, and there's hundreds of bills being flooded in and voted on, now you can see where, hey, if there's cuts to Medicaid, that impacts families with autism. If there's cuts to public education funding, that affects children with autism. If there's a lack of access to programming in our communities because our community programs and after school programs are not getting funding, that directly impacts kids with autism. So it's now taking that information and making it into a tangible where they can advocate and then work towards making our communities more inclusive, more safe, more accessible, honestly, for our friends and family members that have autism.
So here's a key nuance, and I don't think, markets evolve over time. People
Hmm.
grow their understanding over time, and we talk a lot about awareness. We actually, I think the kind of branding just shifted from awareness to acceptance, right?
Yeah.
And that's a recent transition as early as this year. When when we talk about it in our conversation when we first met and now, I think awareness is much more centered around the concept of understanding,
Hmm.
right? Like brain cancer exists. Great. What are you going to do about it? Like, but do you have a fundamental understanding of what that's like? And so same kind of thing is like, great, autism's a thing, but do you understand it? Do you have any kind of insight into it? And it seems like your actual awareness work is more around the concept of understanding.
Yes.
So there's this thing I used to talk about in uh, I don't know if I talked to you about what I did prior to this. Did I? I want to save you a bit of broken record time if not.
Probably.
So effectively, to oversimplify it, I led growth for a decent tech services company in Atlanta, right? So it was like kind of this big business, but I had a relatively large team of marketing, sales engineering, product, like those kind of functions in an organization. And one of the things I would always talk to them about, like when we were talking about coaching or development, and definitely like my leadership team, I would say, you guys have to work on mindset more than specific action. Like, don't walk in a room and train a person how to deliver an effective negotiation.
Hmm.
Train them how to have the right mindset in negotiation. And the reason we used to do that is because, and this is, I'm sure somebody will come back and be like, Armand, you're an idiot. But the reality is what I've learned is that if you can find the right mindset, the action is a natural result.
Right.
And I heard a lot of that in what you were saying, right? For example, if child's perspective changes from that kid's awkward as hell, why are they just sitting over in the corner not talking to anybody and engaging in the way we like to engage, to, oh, they engage differently, or they don't understand the way of engaging in the way that we do, or their method of play is different than my method of play, and they have that understanding, they take a different action in response, right? In other words, the kids aren't bad. They filled out the form incorrectly about what was going on with their peer. We're helping you fill out the form correctly, and oh, magically your behavior changed and you stopped bullying the kid.
Right.
What brought you to that? Like, why do you assume that that's ultimately going to change the behavior? You had to decide at the beginning of this journey that you were going to do something, and you didn't decide, I'm going to walk in and train all these firefighters how to handle a kid with autism. You decided, I'm going to walk in and teach all these firefighters to understand the signs of autism and what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, I saw it in my own life. My younger brother actually wandered out of my high school, and I
Mm.
went to a large high school.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
you're
yeah,
from
yeah.
Texas, you probably know which high school I'm talking about. But I went to a large high school, and he somehow managed to get
Public school?
public school. Yeah.
Okay. And it was known that he had autism
Yes.
or has autism because he didn't
Yeah.
lose it
Doesn't lose
in
it.
the time.
Yeah. Yeah. He has autism. Everybody was aware.
Okay.
And
He was in a special needs class or neurotypical class. I really want to build this story
yeah,
out.
he's in a special needs classroom. There were maybe
Okay.
6 other students there. They were apparently in the gym for their gym time.
Okay.
And at this school, the gym is like at the far end of campus. Like it's a
Okay.
good walking normal pace, 7 to 8 minute walk.
Okay. So it's like quarter to half a mile.
Yeah. So he walks out of the gym, out of the school. Mind you, we have double doors and law enforcement always there. We have an open campus, so not anymore. Now that I've been there, campus is closed, but um, we have an open campus, meaning students can leave and come whenever they want.
Okay. Okay.
Because, for those of us who were seniors, I was a senior at the time. I finished class at noon, so now I would just leave and go to my
Right.
car, drive home. And so
So there was this culture of like kids are always coming and going.
yeah, and so the officers, I was going to assume, couldn't, they just thought he was an average student
Sure.
walking out of the school. So I'm not going to necessarily blame them,
Right. Right. Right.
although his lanyard shows that he's a special ed student. So,
So were there colored lanyards that identify the different, like, okay, this is a senior, this is a junior,
Yes.
this is a special needs student. So you probably had like 7 or 8 colors,
Yeah.
and
So
everybody's wearing their lanyards at all times.
yeah. So we always had to wear lanyards. We had to start doing that after an attempted school shooting incident at my
Okay.
campus. And so for seniors, I think it was like a red lanyard. But if you had special needs, or if you were an athlete or something else, you had a different badge that you had, and you would usually like show it as you walk. So like for
Yeah.
me, I was in the senior year, I was a senior, so I had my senior lanyard, but I was also in our pharmacy technician program, so I had a separate lanyard that I had to wear to show like, hey, I'm going off to a clinical assessment at 10
Yeah.
a.m., so I'm leaving.
There was a way to easily communicate I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing
Right.
to essentially the security personnel.
Right. So for the
Okay.
average senior, having a red lanyard and you're leaving at noon made sense because you were usually done with the day.
Sure.
But for my brother, he was a sophomore, so he had probably like a white lanyard, but he has a different lanyard that shows
Sure.
this is a special ed student.
A checkered white lanyard or
Yeah, something
whatever
like
it
that.
is.
I don't remember what color it was. But he had walked out and gone to a street. There's like a busy intersection that's like a good half mile out of the school.
Okay.
That's where my dad found my brother.
Yeah.
And my dad was on his way to come and get me from school because at the time I had a blinding migraine to where I couldn't see to drive. So I'm like, hey, come get me. We'll get the car later. So if I had not made that call, my brother would probably not be alive today.
There was another nuance there, though, because you told this story, and so I remember
Yeah.
some details of it. I think that your dad took a route that he had never took before, or something
Yeah,
like
he
that. So it was
doesn't often take that route. There was apparently like some kind of an accident on the route he usually takes. So he had to take a different route. So normally, if there was like an east and west of that road, he would normally take the east end, but that day he took the west end, and my brother was on the west end of that street,
just in the middle of the
in
intersection.
the middle of the intersection, just wandering out there. And my parents had.
And when you say this, you mean like physically, there's a 4-lane intersection, there are lights, he's in the dead space in between that people only cross when they have a green light.
Yeah, he
Crazy.
was preparing to like cross the street, and it was not his time to cross the street. So my dad saw him. He could see like my brother kind of hesitating, but seeing like, oh, there's a car, like. And my dad was really just gonna be like, oh, okay, weird kid in the street. Let me make sure to move him. But then when he pulled in closer, he's like,
That's my son.
oh my God, that's my son.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no one had called to let him know that Andrew was even gone. I had no idea. So when I got into the car and saw my brother in the back seat, I'm thinking like, oh, it's noon and
Family fun
we're
day.
gonna go have lunch. Let's go to Chick-fil-A. And then I noticed the look on my dad's face, and that's when I realized like, oh, something's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's when my dad told me, hey, I found your brother wandering in the middle of the street. And I'm like, what do you mean in the middle of the street? Yeah.
What?
Like,
Huh?
yeah.
You don't
And so,
usually start a story off like this, Pops. What's going on here?
right. And so that for me showed me two things.
Right?
One, it showed me that there is a deep need for understanding of what it looks like to protect children with autism in public schools. But it also showed me that there probably isn't an understanding of how to do that. So we can't have somebody, I mean, you don't just tell somebody to ride a bike.
Right?
They have to learn how to operate the bike,
Yeah.
and then they'll be able to ride the bike. So I
Yeah.
kind of use that same logic of,
Right.
well, I can't ask these officers to protect my brother in school. I can't ask these teachers to develop a safety plan if they don't understand what is behind all of that.
Yeah.
So coming into this as Miss Texas, and even when I held the local title before, my mindset was, well, there needs to be education first.
Yep.
And
Yep.
once they get the education, the practical will make a ton more sense. Like
Yeah.
now you understand as an officer why if you pull over an adult with autism, you should probably turn off your siren lights. They're overstimulating.
Yeah.
Or you now understand why you're asking them questions and they're not responding more immediately. they don't know who you are. You have to now explain yourself and explain, hey, I'm an officer. This is what I do. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to do anything. I'm just trying to understand why you were speeding, or maybe, hey, to let you know your taillight's out. Do you know what that means? Things like that. Or, if an officer had seen my brother and was giving him commands, you now understand why my brother's probably running away from you. Not because he's trying to resist arrest, but he's like, hey, threat. I don't know who this is. Let me try to figure out what to do here. So that was my mindset going into it. Was just to provide that education and then now use that as your backbone for here's the practical of what to do now.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons I was so excited to continue our conversation because, so I'm a new implant inside of the past 5 years, right, to the community. But I feel like everybody at this level is a new implant to the community, right? Like we're growing pretty rapidly, so it's like Atlanta. Nobody in Atlanta, if you're from Atlanta, you're like from Atlanta. If you've been in Atlanta for 6 months, you're from Atlanta, right? And so it's interesting because sometimes I feel like we're not the most open community, and what I mean by that is we get really frustrated that people don't understand really quickly. And I appreciate that your mindset and your go-to approach is this notion of, okay, I'm going to first teach the other person and engage like at their level where they're at. I'm going to almost apply the ABA therapy mindset of like, you're here and we're going to try and get you to here and we're going to positively reinforce and like, I understand why you feel that way, but can I offer a different perspective? And like through that, you want to change the action because I think sometimes like our response to these situations and you saw my and our team's response to the big viral RFK event that went down, which was like, hey, yeah, buddy, you're wrong, but also like, I understand and appreciate that you're bringing this awareness. Can we also teach you about what's possible for these kids so that it's not just, whereas our community was like, hey, buddy, you're wrong, and here's the reasons you're wrong, and da-da-da-da. And I just think that we're going to get a lot further as a group if we're applying the you catch more flies with honey approach. And it seems like that's really at the core of this story, and like this was a pretty what's the word? It was a forming event for you. Like I've heard you tell this story twice, and there's sometimes when people repeat stories, it's like, oh, I'm just repeating the story, but there's emotion behind it each time. Like there's something behind it each time you tell it.
Yeah, because I think especially being an immigrant to the United States, for the viewers, I was born in Ghana and then I moved to the US and then I lived in Canada and then came back. Long story. But I've learned being an immigrant, watching my parents have to go through the learning process of what it means to be a parent of someone with autism. In Ghanaian culture, it's gotten a lot better now, but still some work to be done. But it was seen as your son is possessed by a demon. You've got to get rid of this demon that's inside your son. And I remembered my parents, taking my brother to a church in Canada because this big mega pastor was coming and promising healing. So my brother, my parents are like, well, if my brother can get healed from this autism thing, well, we'll be fine. And as a kid, I trust my parents. So I'm like, well, yeah, I want my brother to be healed from autism and I watched my brother wait in line with my dad. He was probably 6, was staring and looking around like, what's happening? And of course, my brother didn't get healed from autism, but
when's the ride start, Dad?
right. And so I just remembered watching my parents kind of go through that and then luckily have a family friend who just happened to be a neighbor of ours say, hey, our son has autism. Here's what we're doing. We have a speech therapist. We have an occupational therapist. We're taking him to go play with kids in the street. We're teaching him to go and, do all these things. And now he's verbal and he's talking and he's able to be more independent and he's doing all these things. And my parents were like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, this seems like a little bit involved. Like, I'm not. But then when my sister had a speech language delay and didn't say her first words until 5, that's when it kicked in for my parents of, oh, we need to do something. Like there needs to be. So then they got into the groups in the neighborhood and they're like, okay, speech language pathologist. occupational therapists. I mean, there was somebody in our house at all times. And as a kid, I'm watching this and seeing it in real time. My parents
Yeah.
are unlearning those harmful stereotypes and understandings of autism. And now, if you ask my dad what he thinks about children with autism, he's like, hey, you need to get your kid this service and this service and this service and this service. This is what my son has. This is what we did. This is what we wish we
Yep.
would have done. And it's so cool to see him go from
Yeah.
my son is demon possessed to no, my son has learning differences and we need to accommodate for that. So I had that framework, but I know others didn't have that. They didn't get to
Yeah.
watch their parents change their mind or change how they do things. And so my job really was to not just go in, even just, I mean, I know I go in with the education, but I also go in with my story. I like to give a tangible of, I'm not coming from this as a, hey, you need to pass this little requirement to move on. I'm coming from a lived experience of look at what happened to my brother and here are all the things we learned and what we wish we would have done.
Yeah.
Now I'm telling you that you have the information. You have Google, you
Yeah.
have Facebook, you have all these resources. This is what you can now do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so there's a couple things that I want to open up a topic discussion here. And we even start this discussion, after I key it up, I want you to tell me if you've even had a discussion around this, because I feel like we could spend some time on it. We all have this like personal connect. Well, I think for now, at least, we all have a personal connection. Like, none of us are dedicating so much time and energy to this field without a direct life experience yet. And I'm hoping we're quickly getting out of that, right? We have the brother, we have the cousin, we have the parent, we have the very close friend. Like, there's something that got us to this section of the world and this need. But I think that's something that's really uniquely special about America and broadly first world countries, but like America in particular, is that as a country has more and more resources and gains more and more resources, what they have the ability to do is support conditions, communities, and individuals who otherwise would have been left to the fringe just as a result of the lack of resources, right? If inflation is 3,000%, you can't afford food, and everybody in the family is working, the child with autism is not getting nearly enough support that they might need.
Right.
The kid who has some type of terminal illness, like they're not spending an extra $100,000 a year on hospital bills, right? We're trying to go get food. And so you have a unique perspective around being able to see both of those types of environments, right? Unfortunately, I can say this as well, Iran has kind of shifted into the latter. It used to be we can support everybody, but since the revolution, the economy has been destroyed. And so my family also is like, I can see, and I've really lived and been in a country where it's clear that, okay, we're not able to support everything.
Right.
Now, the challenge that comes with that is we have the resources and we do support, everything. I'm using air quotes here because I know somebody's going to be like, Armand, we don't support. I know. We're working on it, guys. But we support everything. Like, America is really, let's take care of everywhere. Let's take care of all of our people. But here's the thing that I think we're lacking is, if you have the ability to support everyone, it also comes with the reality that you have to understand what support means for all the everyones, right? And public school ain't the same for that kid and this kid and that kid and so if you're going to be the country of pirates, if you will, right, where we have this freedom kind of aspect of who we are, we have this, we're going to let everybody become this individual identity, this truly you can be what you want, how you want, etc. We have to apply it, and we can't factory line print all the resources that all those individuals utilize on the way up the ladder. And so it starts with something like autism.
Yeah.
Where do we go? How do you get to a point where, like, what is the right level of support for a child with autism look like? What is that environment? Let's say I'm giving you, Annette, the $26 trillion economy. What do you do?
Well, that's where the challenge is because it is truly a spectrum. And so support's going to look different for everybody. I mean, I myself worked in ABA for a summer,
Yeah.
and I mean, I went in thinking, well, I have a brother, so this should be easy. I know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and boy, was I wrong.
Right.
I
Right. Right.
realized,
Right.
like, okay, not even close. There were two kids, both verbal, both similar level of, need, but even what their support looked like was still different.
Completely different.
Yeah, like one
Yeah.
kid, you could put him in a corner and give him a book to read, and he's like, this is the best day of my entire life. But that other kid with the same level of ability is like, please don't put me in a corner with the book. I would rather mop the ocean. Like that, I don't
Correct.
want to do that. Um,
Top the ocean is quality.
so I think really what it is coming to it from a approach that every sector of society needs to be equipped to provide on every level of the spectrum. So you can't just go into a public school and be like, hey, we're going to hire a bunch of special ed teachers.
Mm,
Congrats, we've supported kids with autism.
right.
Okay, do those special ed teachers have specialized education? Do they also have behavioral adaptation skills? Do they have classrooms that are set up for kids with autism spectrum disorder? Do they have technology in their classrooms that can help assist with education? Do they have a school administration that works with them and the families and community partners to create a curriculum and a design that meets all of those different needs? Do we have school resource officers that are trained to work with kids that are on the spectrum that may have behavioral challenges, that may need to be, you know, made note of that they wander and they may run out of the school? Like, do we even have cafeterias that provide different meal options? Because my brother's gluten free, but that doesn't necessarily mean every child on the spectrum is gluten free. But there were no gluten free options at my large
Right.
high school that received millions of dollars in funding every year. We had to pack him
Right.
food every day. Are there cafeterias that are designed with kids to have quiet spaces so they can still be in the cafeteria, but hey, if it gets overstimulating, I can retreat over here? So you see how quickly a school classroom now becomes, well, are the all the other things that can support
Right.
them?
Right.
And that's just school. We're not even going into the workspace. We're not even going into law enforcement agencies. We're not going into hospitals. We're not looking at churches, community organizations, after school programs. I mean, the list literally goes on. Even sidewalks,
Yeah.
driving. I remember I met somebody that is working on creating stickers for driver's licenses for adults and drivers with autism to have some type of label that should they
Mm,
get pulled over and they scan the license, it immediately brings in, hey, this child or this person has autism. Here are the steps that you need to follow. Here are their specific triggers. Here are, the things that you need to do. Like, that's a need.
well, I mean, I think the person would like. I think the counter argument to that, and I'm being careful not to give you my own opinion on this one. I'm curious where you. I think the counter argument to that is if you do that in this case, right? Then there's the next and the next and the next and the next and the next, and now you have this like infinite level of need that pops up, and who's ever going to be able to understand infinity,
Hmm.
right? Like no cop is going to know how to, or let me say police officer because it just sounds like a more respectful term. No police officer is going to know how to navigate 10,000 different conditions that might all come up on the screen. And then I'm sure someone would also argue that it's like, well, people are going to just start making stuff up so that they can have something pop up on the screen so that they can have an easier time. So like that's the natural counter argument to something like that.
Yeah.
How do we build a world?
Well, you can make a counter argument to everything, and I understand it.
Sure.
I mean, there are even law enforcement agencies that have proposed having some sort of a registry where kids could be put in the registry, and then should an officer be called to the home, they already know. But then parents are like, do I really want my kids' information in a registry? Like, I don't. Even
Right.
I would be
Exactly.
I would be
Exactly.
like, I don't know if I want my brother's information just in a public registry. Like that seems weird.
Nah.
And we should, but the reason that they're even proposing that is because training them costs more. That's the point. And so there wouldn't need to be a registry if every officer is trained on what autism spectrum disorder looks like.
Right.
There wouldn't be a need to, you know, think about infinity support
Right.
if everybody is given that education. Like, I mean, I have many friends who are teachers. They spend maybe 2 weeks of their entire master's degree curriculum on special education.
Right. Yeah. This is true.
And with 1 in 31 children being diagnosed with autism, that guarantees one kid in a class will
Yeah,
be
I
on the
mean, just in
spectrum.
terms of public education, you're talking about something like $45 billion.
Right,
And that doesn't include the, 15 dozen other different things we invest in.
right. And so
Therapies,
that's
insurance, etc.
right. And so that's where it becomes a challenge because, there's only so much money, right? But at the same time, it's becoming more common. Like when I was in elementary school, it was normal to not know anybody with autism. Like I think my friends in elementary
Correct.
school only knew somebody had autism because I was always around my brother.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would have never. It felt like when I was in elementary school, like my brother was the only one in the entire elementary school with autism, which is probably not
Correct.
true, but that's what I knew. Now it's like I could talk to someone and they're like, yeah, my brother or my cousin or my dad or my uncle or yeah,
Yeah,
like I
yeah, yeah.
know a coworker with autism. Like it's becoming
Right.
common, but the response has unfortunately become, well, let's try to reduce the incidence of this happening. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen.
Wait, explain that. What do you mean? Let's try and reduce the
Well,
responses. Let's try and reduce the incidence of this happening.
yeah, I mean, considering recent events and comments that were made about autism federally,
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah,
they're making it appear like it's an epidemic, like something is in the water or something is in the food that's making this happen. Whereas the reality is it's not that. It's really that there's more technology, there's more awareness, we have earlier diagnostic
Oh,
tools.
I see. I see. I
So
see.
it's not going to reduce an incidence. If anything, there's going to be more. Because now that I look back at some of my friends from elementary school, I'm like,
Maybe.
that kid was
Yeah.
probably on the spectrum. He wasn't weird, he just had autism. And so that's, I think, where the problem is that when we start to realize how much of a need is necessary to make a society that is more inclusive and more accepting of individuals with autism, it starts to, I think, register for people like, oh, every aspect of society now has to change. It's kind of the same with like accessibility, right?
Yeah.
Without the accessibility federal mandates, I mean, we wouldn't have ramps, we wouldn't have wheelchair accessible tables, we wouldn't have wheelchair accessibility on planes. Every aspect of society had to accommodate for accessibility. And so people are now, I guess, a little bit hesitant to now have to change society to be more inclusive. But I'm like, but ramps help everybody. Like, yes, it's helpful for wheelchairs, but now that I have a suitcase, I could use a ramp. So even a world where there's more technology for adults and children with autism that's more inclusive, we can now have workspaces that provide specialized training, but maybe somebody who has an intellectual disability could benefit from that, or somebody who has a traumatic brain injury could benefit from that. So it can be helpful to everybody, even though it's initially geared towards somebody with autism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that. Well, let me see if it makes sense. I think part of what you're saying is that in order to we've seen that accessibility works,
Mhm.
right? And the example being like disability accessibility. And we've seen that society can change broadly for the benefit of everyone, and it really has a negligible, if any, cost on the actual society,
Mhm.
right? Other than like the fear of change.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm picking up what you're putting down by saying that, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, there is a legitimate argument that you can't caretake everyone. You can't do everything for everyone. Like eventually it will become so costly to teach everyone that you actually don't do anything in society. And I understand that, but I think that argument's only valid because the way we go about teaching everyone is, okay, you need to learn about autism. You need to learn about disability. You need to learn about this. You need to learn about that. And like we just list out all these different possible things that everybody needs to learn about. And it's excessive. And I go back to what you and I started this conversation with. I'm fairly confident that a much more effective approach would be to say, okay, we all need to change our mindset that there's 300 million individuals in this country. Right? And when you walk up to this, proverbial book that you can't judge by its cover, right? When you walk up, you don't know shit. You don't know anything about them, their background, their history, their this, right? Most people think they know where I'm from, then they hear Armand and they're like, oh shit, I don't know where this guy's from at all, right? And so if everybody starts the interaction with, I know that I know nothing, and then continues through the interaction, human to human, and our mindset shifts to that, right? I am going to have one-on-one interactions broadly every single time I have an interaction. You actually don't need to do any training at all. The cost of training is zero because I don't need to know about 500 different things.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn about the thing when I meet the person who has the thing. They're going to tell me about it because I'm going to be open to listening, and we'll navigate our relationship forward accordingly, right? And the environment broadly will become much more accommodating. And so my point is really a counter argument to the counter argument that there's this fear that we're having to do too much training about people. And it's like, yeah, well, it's because we're starting to realize there's so many differences in people. But at the end of that road is us just getting to a point where we're like, hey, everybody stop the bullshit and just understand you're talking to an individual, have a conversation, and the world's going to get much better, much quicker for all of us.
Oh, absolutely. Like that's pretty much my whole point is that it has to get to a point where we as everyday people recognize this is an everyday thing. Like people with autism exist. They're not hidden in some weird jungle somewhere. Like they're here. And when we come to that understanding, you just naturally want to help. Like I am the way that I am because of my brother. I truly believe if I did not have a brother with autism, I wouldn't be interested in going to, like, I'm going to Washington, D.C. in July with Autism Speaks to speak with congressmen and women about different legislation. Like, I wouldn't be
Sure.
interested in doing that. I wouldn't be interested in volunteering with autism events. I may want to do it just to be, an empathic human being, but I wouldn't
Sure.
make it a thing that I need to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I know a lot of my friends, even in the recent years, when they've heard about my brother's story or they heard about what's going on, and I repost something like, "Hey guys, this thing is happening. We need to bring awareness." They're like, "Yeah, we're reposting." Like,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
now
yeah,
they also have an understanding of, hey, there are people with autism that exist and they need assistance, they need advocacy, they need people to help them or give them opportunities. And I think even some of the representation we have of persons with autism in the media is helping people because
yeah.
now that we
Huge,
have
huge
love
help.
on the spectrum and
Yeah.
people are like, hey, don't talk about Tanner like that, like, or don't talk
Yeah.
about, this other person like that, like that's so mean. But because we now have it as, see, they're everyday people who are just trying to find love, trying to have this normal experience of life. Now the average person is going into it like, hey, well, we want to be able to help them or help them connect and find friends and do all this stuff. So you're right. Like if we make it something that everybody's aware of, everybody understands, and everybody comes to a place of this is a commonplace thing, there won't be a need to do training. Now the average teacher, the average officer, the average community member is like, yeah, we need to do that. So when I go into the school and I realize, hey, we don't have this thing, Now it becomes we don't have to go down to state capitol and advocate for billions of dollars for this thing to be done. There's teachers and systems coming in that are already setting it up, and now it
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah. So, moral of the story, friends and folks, if we can get to a place to where we stop effectively assuming what's behind the mask, so to speak, and we can just get to a place to where we broadly are willing and interested to understand other people, we can also get away from the place where we have to do, 10 different forms of inclusivity training every time we meet new people, because we just as a society naturally conduct the training when we're interacting with new people. And so if you want the training to stop, just give a shit about your fellow people.
I mean,
Words from Annette and Armand.
from Armand.
No?
Those are not my words. He said it. I'm just co-signing.
I'm the John Hancock. She's one of the other signatures down at the bottom
Yes.
corner of the bill. All right, so I have something else that in what you were talking about. I actually found a point. I don't know if it's disagreement, but I think I'm on an island by myself right now. So I'm pretty well read when it comes to the research of our community, right? So, for example, the CDC's publication was, the thing that got the news was RFK's address, but really what happened was the CDC published its updating findings. For those who don't know, Annette, I'm sure you know, but like I just want to quickly get the community that basically every 2 years the CDC publishes updated report on autism spectrum disorder. And what they're looking at is, I think there's roughly 16 different sites where they are able to evaluate trend lines with autism diagnoses. The conventional wisdom in the community is we have gotten much better at diagnostics, and we're much more interested in actual understanding of what's going on. And so as a result of that, autism spectrum rates are increasing. The counter argument is that autism spectrum rates are increasing, and this is an environmental factor. And as a result, we need to figure out what the environmental factor is that's causing it so that we can eliminate that environmental factor. And so I say that because it's like there's this two sides of the argument that are staring and like yelling at each other. And the reason I'm saying I sit on an island by myself is because I haven't seen a report yet that has actually studied causal work. And what I mean by that is, like, even in the CDC's recent report, they said it is most likely the case that these rates of increase are coming from this, and it's the same things we're talking about. But we just don't know yet. Like, we literally do not actually know. And I think, in a sense, that's causing more harm, because rather than us just like throwing money at the research and saying, hey, look, figure this out. Where is it coming from? Why is it happening? Is it better diagnostics? By the way, and I think this is why the war is occurring, and so I want to get your thoughts on this. Throw money at it, figure out if it's biological, genetic, environmental, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's figure it out. But the problem is that when the environmentalists are saying, hey, this is an environmental issue, there seems to be this tinge of, yeah, we're going to stop supporting the better diagnostics, the better evaluation, the better resources and support for autism. And so there's this also backlash of like, hold up, stop. It seems like you're trying to cut the legs off of the community in that conversation. So I just broadly told you a perspective I had, and again, I think I'm on an island on this one, even among my own staff. So trust me when I say we have some interesting debates internally, and I love them, and I celebrate them. But I'm curious, after hearing that, what are your thoughts?
I would be on the coast of that island with you.
Okay.
On the
Okay,
coast.
fair enough. I appreciate the way you described that,
Yeah.
actually.
I think two things can be true at the same time.
Okay.
That there needs to be research that better supports, the better diagnostics, the better, understanding where the diagnostic rates are coming from, all that. But not even but, and there also should be research understanding why it's happening. Like, why does autism exist? What is it? But I think that unfortunately in the scientific community, and especially just with the way politics has influenced science, which as a researcher, I worked in research for 7 years, so
I have the same opinion on this. Keep going.
it's
Yeah.
very hard when I see this, but science and politics don't mix. And so,
Correct.
it is very difficult when you have a political environment that's very, you're either this or this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the vast majority of us are in the middle,
Yeah. Yeah.
vast
Yeah. Yeah. This
majority.
is very
And
true.
so with science, you can't just say, well, we're going to look at the cause of autism and then not look at how to support them. You
Right.
can
Right.
do
Right. Right.
both. And that's really where I stand on the issue. And so I think that the reason why people hesitate when environmentalists come out and say, hey, there may be some environmental factors, is because people automatically assume that if there is an environmental factor that's causing autism, well, then we stop all the ABA, we stop all the
Yeah.
programming, we
Yeah.
stop. And it's like, no, 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 no. We can find the cause of cancer and still support cancer research in the same way that we can find the cause of autism and still support autism research. But I
And the
also,
message sounds like we're going to stop the support.
right, and
But we still have 1 in 31 kids who have autism.
exactly. And so I think I empathize with the people who are hesitant about environmentalists because I can
Yeah.
understand. My parents were the parents that believe vaccines caused autism, and so I actually wasn't vaccinated for decades until I got the COVID vaccine, and my parents were like, "Oh my God."
What are you doing?
And then I'm like,
Yeah.
"See,
Yeah.
I didn't die. I'm fine." And they're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
"Okay." But that was their thing for years. And I empathized with them because, their experience led them to believe that. Um, in Ghana, we don't get the same vaccination schedule as the US. I was the only one of my siblings born in Ghana. I, quote, turned out fine. And then my
Right.
brother and sister were born in the United States.
Quote team. She turned out fine.
Quote,
Okay.
team,
Just.
quote, big air quotes. I still have ADHD and it's fine. But my brother and sister were born in the US. My sister didn't have her first words until 5. My brother was diagnosed with autism. So my parents kind of put 2 and 2 together and thought, well, it must be the vaccines, even though the research has been very clear it's not. So I can understand why people don't want environmentalists to fund their research to figure it out because then it creates this idea of, well, then autism is this disease, and so
Yeah.
that we can't support it. And it's like, it's not though. We don't know what causes it. There have been
Correct.
so many studies that have so many different causes.
Correct.
So, and they're all correlations, right? I mean,
Right.
nothing, we don't,
Everything is correlation.
everything is
right?
correlation. There is nothing definitive in the science to date that says this causes autism. Doesn't
Correct.
exist. Everything has
Right.
been, well, there's a correlation between women having children in their late 30s or
Right.
having children with men in their 40s and autism.
Right.
There's a racial correlation. It's more
Right.
prevalent in Hispanic and Black populations, but not in, and so it's all correlative. But it doesn't.
Right. Right. Right.
None of that negates the need for research on making sure they still get special education, that they still
Right.
get the care that they need. So, moral of the story, I think both things can happen at once, and we shouldn't allow for one to negate the other.
It's you said something else that's interesting in there that I really liked is that so the environmentalists have this perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
The geneticists have this perspective, and really we're just like naming two communities because it's not environmentalists and it's not geneticists. It's just people who believe that's the cause.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, politicians and scientists mixing is bad.
Horrible.
Right?
Yes.
And I would even add to that the scientific method doesn't help us here because the entire principle is I have a hypothesis, I want to go research it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the challenge with that is, and it's like exponentially worse when you add politics in there. It's I believe this is the thing, and I want to go and try and prove that is true.
Right.
Which is very different than an honest pursuit of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think this is a problem and I want to understand why is very different than I think this is a problem, this is the cause, and I want to prove that this is the cause.
Right.
And your entire framework for how, we go back to everything in this conversation seems to be going back to mindset, but your entire framework of actions, if it's the latter, changes.
Right.
Right? The way you conduct the study, the way you analyze the results, who you get involved in order to ensure the study is conducted. Is it a double-blind experiment? Probably not if you're trying to prove what you're trying to prove, right? And to your point, politics makes this way worse. It's the issue we have as it relates to climate. It's the issue we have as it relates to everything. And so when politics and science mixes, you already have this implicit bias from a scientist who wants to prove their hypothesis true, right? And now you have a politician who wants the bill and the funding and the thing who's like, I need that hypothesis to be true, go make it happen. And who's affected? The person that's being studied that we're supposedly trying to help.
Exactly.
So I'm really glad you made that point.
Yeah.
Genuinely glad you made that point.
No, because I don't think people recognize why researchers really don't want to be involved in the political discussion around autism, because then it impacts their research. And especially as someone who comes from the research world, your research has to be unbiased. It has to not have any conflicts of interest. But, unfortunately, there are bad apples in every bowl of apples, and there's always going to be somebody that will take the payout to make their thing happen. And so it's so frustrating. And I think that is really why people are so anti-environmental research, because they, unfortunately, as time has progressed, have been the ones that have come out and made these very headliner statements about autism. And then it completely impacts how physicians diagnose, how parents look at treatment, how ABA therapists look at programming. And it, in the end, hurts individuals with autism. And the goal here is to help them. So if we're going to look and try to find out what causes it, let's look at it from a lens of, we're doing this to help them, not to label them and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean, it has to require a mental shift. I just don't see any other way for us to interact or engage unless it is. And quick side note, friends and family, always start with the conflict of interest statement. It's at the very bottom of every research paper.
Yes.
And basically, if there's anything there, just go read the next research paper, because as soon as I start there and I'm like, it's gonna take me forever to read these 20 pages anyway, and this person was paid by Pfizer. No, thank you. So let's just go to the next research that's actually unbiased. But to your point, that's the problem, because you get a lot more funding and a lot more grants, and the check comes when there's something in the conflict of interest box. So it's kind of hard to decouple the two.
Yeah.
I have one more question for you before we wrap up. What do the next 5 years look like for a soon-to-be former Miss Texas?
Oh, gosh. Not the 5-year plan. It's like my dad all over again. Like, what's your 5-year plan? Dude, I don't know, just survive. I mean, no, realistically.
You're feeling the pain of every employee of Unity Behavioral Services right now.
I mean, big thing, I'm starting law school in the fall, which is really exciting.
Congratulations again.
So that'll be 3 years of my life is doing that. But I get the question all the time of, well, will you still be doing autism advocacy now that you're not Miss Texas? Yes, my brother is still alive. And if he wasn't, I'd still be doing it. It doesn't stop. So I'm really excited to be still working with Autism Speaks. We have a really cool event that's a national event. So you can sign up on the Autism Speaks website, but people have the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and hear from Autism Speaks and the different bills that they're working on at the congressional level to advance the work that's being done for autism. If you didn't know, Autism Speaks has the only federal bill called the Autism Cares Act that provides any kind of research, programming, funding for kids, adults, and families with autism. And they passed the Autism Cares Act in December of 2024, so last year, of $2 billion of funding over the next 5 years So right now, our next step is the Family Caregivers Act. I know I would have benefited from something like that if it had passed when I was a kid, but that act would essentially allow for families who are on wait lists to get diagnostics. My brother was on a wait list for 8 years
Hmm.
to be able to get special services in their neighborhood that's translated to multiple different languages to be able to support families who are looking for that support but can't get on the list for that. So we're working on that. There's a lot of other bills on there as well, but it's a really great opportunity to meet other families, meet other people that are going to be there that are advocating. I will be there. I'll be giving a keynote, but also speaking to Congress members as well. This is the time to do it. We're at a new administration, so we've got to get the word out there. I have found autism to be a very, well, I always thought it was a very bipartisan issue. Maybe after recent comments, I'm not sure, but we'll
I
see.
think it is
It's
still.
still,
I
I think
understand why the
still,
feeling is that
but
way. I, you know, we will. I think we could schedule another hour and just spend it on that
yeah.
right there. But I understand why that sentiment is there because it really did feel a little dejected. But
Yeah.
I don't think that was the intent.
I think it's still relatively bipartisan. I think
Yeah,
everybody's been touched by it, regardless of what side you're on. So they all want to help. The biggest thing is just giving them the information. So that event gives you
right,
the
right.
opportunity to do that. But yeah, that's pretty much my 5 year plan in a nutshell. Law school, pass the bar, get a job, but then also continue my work with autism advocacy. That's never going to stop. The biggest thing for us, my brother lives overseas in my home country of Ghana right now. So our biggest thing is to be able to get policies in place and stuff in place so he can be here. Making an 18-hour flight every year to go and see him is brutal,
Yeah.
very expensive also. So it'd be nice to be able to have him here in the United States where he can get the care. It's affordable, but it's also what he needs is the biggest thing.
Well, friends, family, Annette Addo-Yobo. I really appreciate you chatting with me,
Of
and I
course.
think I definitely want to schedule some time for us so that we might have to decide after we have the discussion, schedule some time for us to discuss the political side of this, because, but I think that between us, I have a feeling that's going to be a much more fiery conversation, and so have the conversation first and then decide after if we're going to post it, because that's
Yeah, ask me after
um,
I've taken my foundational law school courses.
fair. All right, so we'll tee that one up for a year and a half from now.
Yeah, because
Um,
I've always heard once you take those foundational law school courses, your mindset on all things politics changes.
yeah, it just rips apart. Well, I'm sure you also get keyed into a lot more of the like inner workings and what really happens, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's the perspective of big business and capitalism, and then I can tell you what's actually going on behind the scenes with investors and stuff, and it's different. I imagine law and politics are the same way,
Yeah.
though. I shy away from politics as much as I possibly can, other than being the outside guy looking in with probably too many opinions. I really appreciate you chatting with
Of
me,
course. Thank you for having me.
and I'm looking forward to our next one. So until then, friends, Annette will be around Texas, and as she said, she's a huge promoter and advocate for Autism Speaks Unity. We've been kind of integrating our organization as well. They're a bit of a beacon for the autism community. We'll see how that continues over time. And until the next one, much love, and we'll talk to you soon.
Hi, everyone.
Take care, friends.